Okay, so it's wonderful to see so many of you here today. Thank you very much for joining, especially if this is the first time that you've been on a CSCCE community call. So I'm really going to serve as the warm-up today on this topic of project management and really help to frame the conversation about why workflow management tools can be really helpful. I think this has come especially to the fore, not just because it's the beginning of a new year and we're probably looking ahead and thinking about what our plans are for the year, but for those of us that are working remotely or continuing to work remotely, really getting on top of managing project workflows can be the key difference between kind of drowning under too many updates in your inbox and losing track of the threads of the different projects that you're on, and feeling like you're actually thriving and enjoying collaborating together as a team. So that's what we're going to be exploring together today. So first of all, a little bit of framing. So there's a lot that we could talk about in terms of project management, and we don't have time on today's call to go through the entire kind of project life cycle. So I just wanted to use this slide to frame what it is that we are going to focus on. So I'm going to kick us off by describing three common problems associated with managing project workflows. So how it is that we get collaborative work done together in terms of managing tasks on a project. But it can be helpful just to zoom out and acknowledge that that is part of a kind of multi-stage process of conceptualizing a project, planning that project out, getting the rest of the project team on board, and then learning from what happened in managing and delivering that project so that you can continue to improve in the future, and then closing things out. So we, over the last year, have kind of built out our own internal project management process. So we're a small but mighty team. We get a lot of things done and multiple things happening at once. And so we've had to really think carefully as an all-remote organization about how we could take that out of our inboxes and move that over into some clearer project management workflows. So we have, templates and terminology and so on, that could be discussed at a future date about all of these other stages of the project management process. So scoping out what it is that a particular project is and what falls outside of the remit of a particular project, planning that out in terms of then assigning roles and creating a project plan and documentation and kind of what goes into that, and then onboarding the project team and getting their feedback before actually starting work together. And then, as I said, this process of reviewing and doing a retrospective at the close of a project is really important for learning together, and then tidying up any of the loose ends and making sure, especially that you've done things like created templates in case you're going to do a similar project again. But what we're going to focus on mostly today is this managing and delivering phase. So what does it actually look like to manage getting the work done, and how can we make sure that that's as painless a process as possible? So for folks in this community who like reading, and I know there's lots of you, if the conversations today kind of pique your interest, one of the most helpful books that I've read on this subject is Cal Newport's A World Without Email. So this book is a little broader than just project management, but it really is getting at the work that we're all involved with, right? Knowledge work. So how we create new knowledge together in our roles, in our jobs. And a big challenge of knowledge work is finding time with uninterrupted focus. So, whether we've got kind of our email pinging in the background or notifications popping up on the screen about something else, or just lots and lots of meetings that we need to attend, having that broken focus can be really difficult for getting the deep knowledge work done that's so important to adding value in our roles. And so Newport calls that attention capital. And in the book, A World Without Email, he outlines how and why, in the first part of the book, these constant interruptions to our attention really prevent us from doing our best collaborative work. Why that leaves us stressed out, why it isn't really possible to be focusing on multiple things at once, and that this really is just becoming very inefficient. And then in the second part of the book, he proposes three broad types of solutions. So the first of these is really thinking about the processes that you design. And so that's really what we're going to get into today in talking about workflow tools. The second is about the protocols that you use to review the work. So when do you do team meetings to review a project board, for example? What is the protocol for reviewing work? And then finally, something that he calls is specialization. So having kind of designated areas on which we focus rather than trying to kind of be in all places at all times. And so on today's call, for those of you that perhaps follow up or have already read the book, what we're really going to be focusing on is the things that Newport describes as processes, and then maybe some of the things that he describes as protocols. Okay, so I promised you that I was going to frame this with three kind of common project management or workflow problems that we can encounter in doing remote or asynchronous teamwork. And so the first problem might feel familiar, and that's that no one on the team knows what anybody else is doing right now on this shared project, or even if they're working on it at all. So if we're just kind of delegating work and then waiting for various pings by email, it could be that our teammates are being pulled off on another project. Typically we're working on more than one thing at once. And so we can kind of lose track of like what's going on and how the work is actually progressing. And if you're the lead, perhaps you're then too busy to keep doing that constant realignment. So they're then sending around the summary email to make sure that everybody gets back on the same page, or thinking about whether we need to schedule another conversation or another long update about what's been done since last time we spoke. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is the case where everybody is now confused. We're not quite sure who's done what. We're starting to have what's turning into a very long back and forth on an email thread. And then somebody pipes up and says, why don't we just have a quick call to clarify what's going on? And then suddenly that focus time that you might have had to work on something has now been taken over with an unplanned meeting. And those can end up getting pretty disruptive to your schedule and making it pretty hard to do that deep focus on actually delivering the work. And the bigger the project, the more folks that are involved, perhaps the more of these unplanned meetings ends up happening, and this quickly spirals into being its own thing. And then problem number three is related to the work deliverables. So all this kind of flinging things around by email and people sending along like a draft of something to review. I don't know whether I can actually use the search function sufficiently to know what subject line I'm meant to be searching for. And actually, now that I've opened this thing, I'm not really absolutely positive that this is the latest version. And so, version control can become a problem as well. Okay, so these are three common problems if you kind of haven't really thought about project management workflows, and especially if you're leaning a little too heavily on email. So the short takeaway from that is that email's typically a terrible way to manage complex collaborative work. And so what we're going to talk about now is the role of ticket-based tools such as Trello. Things like Jira are also a ticketing-based tool to help to address each of those three problems. So how can Trello or equivalent tools help? Well, first of all, they can decentralize management of the work. So rather than having somebody who is already very busy and feeling increasingly overwhelmed, constantly trying to bring everybody back onto the same page, by making things visible on boards and in tickets on those boards, we can decentralize somewhat the management of that work. So anybody on the team can then come along and see who's doing what. We're making things visible, we're making the process much more transparent. And then we're also building in accountability, because if we've assigned different people to different tickets or to different tasks within a ticket, then we can see at any one point who's working on what, and we can know and handle the fact that there might be multiple things going on at once. The other things that these ticket-based systems can help us with is they can remove the need for unscheduled meetings. Again, we can go back to the board and see what's going on. And if we assign due dates to various things on the board, then we can see when things are slipping behind schedule, and we know when we need to review that, or that's something that gets automatically brought up at the next scheduled check-in meeting about the project. And of course, that has the added bonus that that allows asynchronous movement forward. You know, we're not always relying on having synchronous communication back and forth, or to hand over one deliverable to somebody else, because we can move the tickets along and see what's happening. And so sort of addressing problem 3, this also enables the deliverables to be more easily updated and versioning to be clear. So if you're tracking what's happening, then everybody who is touching a ticket is going in and sticking to the discipline of updating what's going on. Then we can track back and see, you know, where the latest version is, and link out to that. And then finally, you'll know that we're a big fan of creating artifacts from work that we do together collaboratively, so persistent outputs that kind of live on. And one of the benefits of having specific boards with tickets on for specific projects means that you can go over to that space specifically when you want to work on that project and see everything related to that project there, rather than having it mingled in with everything else that's flying in to your inbox. And that you can come back to that again in the future when perhaps you might deliver a similar project. It allows you to be able to clone some of those tickets and repeat things again, rather than having to go right back to the beginning and recreate everything from scratch. So that's a brief sort of introduction to, you know, some of the challenges of managing workflows and why these ticket-based tools can help. So what I was going to do now is walk us through a very quick demo of how we've been using Trello, and just chat through some of the kind of key features of that. I'm not going to go into lots and lots of detail. If this is something that you want to get the kind of advanced perspective on, or really dig deep on, then feel welcome to come into the breakout room and we can kind of dive into it in a little bit more detail there. So let me just bring up Trello to show you. So we have a paid team space on Trello. So we have a workspace, and in a workspace, you can invite various different members to come along and collaborate on individual boards that are on that space. So what we're looking at now is one board in that space. And so you can decide to portion boards out in broadly one of two ways. So you might decide that there is a specific project that you want to put on a board, so something that's got multiple different elements that need to build towards its delivery, and so it needs an entire board to see the project. Or we also use boards for specific functions. So here, this is our communications board, our comms board for Q1 of this year. So this is where Katie and I, and increasingly Sima as well, our new communications assistant, are kind of managing the regular communications, external communications that we're doing about the work that CSCCE does. And the idea with these boards is that you create headings, you can create columns on the boards, and you can, Trello has templates, but it also allows you to do this free form if you prefer. And our kind of preferred setup for this is to have a set of templates over on the left-hand side. So these are individual cards that can be reused, a backlog of stuff that hasn't been started yet, a next up column, so starting to queue up things that we know are coming next, an in progress column of things that you're working on right now, things that are ready for review, so we can see them out separately, and they might go back and forth between being reviewed and then going back to being in progress. With comms, we then have ready to go. So it's been reviewed, it's been signed off, it's ready to publish, but maybe it doesn't need publishing just yet. And then we've got done and published. And then the idea is that you start off with all your cards over on the left-hand side of the board, so in the backlog of things to do, and then you go fishing in that backlog and pull out cards or tickets into the next column, and then you bit by bit move them across the columns over onto the right-hand side. The magic is in this maximum of 3 cards or 3 tickets rule. And so this has been really transformative for us. So back to this idea of not having completely divided attention. one of the things that Newport talks about in his book that he also learned from others is this idea of only ever having 3 things on the go at once. It forces you to prioritize what it is that you're putting your time and your attention on, and then to get that through to the next iteration of complete before you then go back to the backlog or back to the next up column and pick the next thing that you're going to move along. So that's just a sort of brief overview of kind of what that looks like. And then within cards themselves, you can create to-do lists, so you can have checklists on them. The templates that we see here allow you to pick things that are kind of standard that you do regularly, and to just not have to recreate them every time. So why don't I add something to the backlog and show you how it works? If I want to add a card here, I could just create a brand new card, or I could take a card from the template. So if I say, well, like, why don't we add a blog post card? I'll pick the blog post template, and then I can name that card the task that it's going to be. So it's Community Manager Appreciation Day on Monday. So we're going to do a Community Manager Appreciation Day blog post. So we could put it there on the card. We can keep the checklists that are automatically in our blog post template card, and we can make that card. And then I can decide to open up the card and have a look in it. And you'll see that the checklist has automatically been copied over. So we draft the blog post, review it. You can assign different people to do these different tasks, go through an editing process, publish it, and then we want to share it out in various different channels to make sure that people can find it. You can assign different people to different cards, and they then get notifications about what's going on. So again, only the people working on this particular element of the project need to be bothered by notifications about it. And then we tend to use the description section to link out to the Google Docs where we're actually doing the drafts of the communications. So this is an example of a board that is being used to manage a function, in this case, our comms function at CSCCE. And then the other thing that I'll just very briefly show you, because I want us to get onto the other demos, is that we also use it for specific projects. So Camille uses Trello to manage our community engagement fundamentals course. So we've got very similar setup here with the columns across the top. And it's just that each of the tickets is one of the weeks on the course. And then within each ticket, we've got the checklist for what needs doing for each of the lessons and the collabs during the course. So that's a very, very quick overview of what Trello looks like as a ticketing system. And then let me just bring up my final slide of takeaways before we allow time for the others to do their demos. Okay, so some of the things that we've learned in implementing a ticketing system is this takes discipline, especially at first. So it can be really tempting to just slip back into the, oh, I'll just send a quick email and let somebody know about something, rather than trusting the setup of the ticketing system. But stick with it, and then everybody sticks with it, and then it becomes a lot more part of your kind of regular workflows. And then, as I mentioned, this limit of 3 in-progress tickets on a board at any one time has been absolutely transformative. It really forces you to make hard decisions and to focus down on what you can realistically be working on at any one time. We do kind of recommend building out a whole process. So I mentioned, project workflows just as part of a broader set of, managing the project life cycle. But if you can only do one thing right now, maybe start by experimenting with a ticket-based system and then build the rest of the things around that. So the project plan templates and the retrospective templates and so on. I would recommend diving in at the ticket-based system, and in playing with that and trialing that, I think a lot of the other questions will fall out quite naturally. It can be really helpful to document as you go. So we've written kind of instructions as to how we set our boards up, and we use categories on our boards and color coding for the different functions and so on. And template as you go as well. So I showed you some of the templates that we have for kind of blog posts and our Twitter threads and things like that. Always great to create those cookie cutters so that you can come along and make more biscuits faster later. And then don't forget to build in training in your new process for your new team members. So all this documentation is going to be super helpful for getting everybody else up to speed when they join their team later on. And then finally, get a little creative and have some fun with it. So you can do a lot of customization with these tools now. So I mentioned, we've color coded our boards by function. You can customize them and put on custom backgrounds and logos and things like that. You can set up various automations on the boards as well, and customize some of those messages and so on. So it doesn't just have to be kind of tickets moving across a board. You can brighten that up and have it feel like somewhere that is more fun to hang out.